Welcome to another edition of RCE. This is Brock Palin. You can follow me on Twitter at Brock Palin, all one word. You can find all that information on the RCE website at www.rce-cast.com. I also have here again Jeff Squires, who is again across the country from me, so we are doing all this remotely. I am again in my little recording booth, size of like a porta-john or something. And so we're going to be back to... Yeah, we're back to kind of passing things back and forth, so if things don't sound as smooth as the last show, it's because we're kind of separate again. So, Jeff, again, for helping out.
Yeah, it's always easier when we have that once a year sitting together recording a show. It's a lot easier when you have all those visual cues of human communication and stuff like that, and not the limitations of Skype. But we're back to our regularly scheduled program. Well, I guess I should say it's not quite regular because December is always a down month. We're all recovering from supercomputing. Heck, I've even been really slow on my blog. I think I've only gotten 1 or 2 entries out so far, but I got to get another one in before Christmas. We're recording right before Christmas here, so this will probably be the last episode of the year, right, Brock?
Yes, this will definitely be the last one of this year, but we will be back with more stuff. We've got things scheduled coming up after the new year.
Yeah, we'll resume a much more regular schedule back in January of 2011. Mm-hmm. All right, so Brock, what do we got on tap for today?
So our guest today is Paul Miller, who is in Hamburg, Germany, so it's a big time zone difference here. He is one of the authors of dCache, and I've never actually used dCache. It was something I ran into at SC. So we'll let Paul introduce himself, and then we can go from there. So, Paul, welcome to the show. Why don't you say a little bit about yourself?
Hi, so my name is Paul Miller. I've been working on various sort of grid-related projects for rather a large number of years now. Before being at DAISY, I was working at the University of Glasgow, and then about 3 years ago, I moved over to Hamburg, and I've been working on dCache ever since.
All right, well, let me kick it off here with give us a description of what dCache is. So I went and looked at your website, and I read a little bit of the material there, and I was maybe you can explain right off, how is this different from, say, a parallel file system?
So with dCache, you have this idea of combining lots of storage together in kind of a RAID 0 style. It differs from a regular sort of cluster file system by having more emphasis on the management aspect. So you can steer where the data is placed in the cluster that you have. It also has tape backend support, so you can write files to tape if you need to. And it also supports lots of different protocols. So whereas a cluster file system will typically be mounted locally and that's it, this dCache actually supports lots of ways of people accessing the data.
I see. So it's more of a data blob, where a blob is accessible in a variety of standardized protocols that many people can be aware of, but you're not limited to just one file, open, close, read, write kinds of protocols.
Well, it's actually mostly open, read, and maybe delete. But we don't actually support modifying files. So you are operating on files, but once you've written the file, that's it. It sort of becomes immutable.
I see. What's the rationale for that? So this is, if I make sure I understand you, that this is kind of a write once philosophy. So it goes in and is kind of locked in like Roach Motel.
Exactly, yes. So the rationale, where it comes from, is particle physics. So with particle physics experiments, you have a large amount of data being written out, and this is data that is never going to be changed because it's what you've measured from the equipment. And then later on, people want to do analysis runs or understand the data better and then do analysis runs. And these, again, create files that, you don't want to change. So because there's no strong motivation, there's no requirement for people to add the ability to modify files, we just didn't implement that feature. And it makes our lives a lot easier in providing dCache.
So you mentioned dCache was motivated by particle physics. Was there a specific project that funded the actual dCache production?
So yes, there was a particular project that was a joint project between DAISY Hamburg and the Fermilab facility near Chicago, and the two projects were producing software, or wanted to produce software that was taking what the physicists were already doing in the way of they were managing their data, and try and sort of provide that as a service that the physicists could then just use. So this is around about the year 2000, 2001. We had the prototype deployed here at DAISY, and then early 2002 it was in production at DAISY and Fermilab.
So this is, can you actually write the data through dCache? Just open and write, but then you can't modify?
Basically, yes. What we found is, well, what the team found was that the protocols that were available, such as NFS, were not fast enough to provide the necessary throughput. Particularly, they had single points that were bottlenecks. So an NFS server is at a particular point, and that becomes a bottleneck. So because of these, there wasn't anything sort of really appropriate. The team were developing replacement protocols to allow a faster throughput. So at that point, you couldn't mount dCache and do normal POSIX, open, close, write, but you have a library that you can use which has all the functionality that you would have apart from modify. So you can write data in, and then when you close the file, it becomes immutable. But you could link applications against this library and then use it as you would a normal file system.
So you mentioned that I think you said earlier it makes our lives a lot easier, given that you can't modify the data. What kind of optimizations and code simplicities do you get out of that model as compared to a read, modify, write kind of model?
So pretty much the simplicities you might imagine. So that we don't have global locks or a locking structure that we need to support. We don't have to support synchronicity. For us, the files never change, so we don't need to worry about removing stale versions of a file. Those things along those lines, really.
Now, can you get better bandwidth, or is it more optimizations on, say, the management side before you can, decide to start streaming the file? You can always just decide to start sending the data directly because you never need to check whether it's stale or anything like that. Or are there other optimizations in terms of, say, bandwidth?
So with bandwidth, the main optimization we have is in dCache is that we can talk directly to where the machines that the data is stored. This is something. It's not actually an optimization for as a result of making files immutable. Lustre, for example, also supports this, but it's something that we needed to use custom protocols for. For the immutable files being a benefit, this is I think mostly just a management issue, and the fact that we can afford to cache files quite aggressively.
So dCache itself, it's not a file system. It sits between the client and your real backend file systems.
It's kind of both. The storage where files are stored, that you have to have a file system there. You can't just access the block level device itself. So typically somebody would take a partition that they want to use dCache with and format it with XFS or whatever, and then mount it as you would